Okay, so we're continuing chapter 5 of the illustrated story of Stephen Stroh. Stephen rode home on his bicycle. His mother had made spaghetti. At dinner, he told his parents about swimming in the pond, the sunfish nests, and the 2 big bass. That night, Stephen lay in bed in an uncomfortable mood. He was already 20. He would have to move out of the house soon, but where would he go? He liked the work at the orchard, but he knew that he could never raise a family with the pay he got there. But what other skill did he have? How would he live? He remembered the thoughts on beaver ponds he'd had that afternoon. Then he thought about forests. He remembered the stand of tall pines where the fort had been. It occurred to Stephen that mature stands of pine have only mature trees. Some pine saplings struggled in the understory under the closed canopy, but Stephen remembered that most of those were dead before their trunks were 5 inches in diameter. The pine saplings could not grow up under the shadow of their parents. I'm just like that, Stephen thought to himself. Poplar trees never try to grow up under their parents' canopy. Poplar seeds are tiny and light and enclosed in a puff of cottony fiber to blow on the wind far away from where their parents had grown. The best luck for a poplar seed was to land on a recently abandoned beaver pond. Poplars were always the first trees to colonize a new spot of vacant land. Stephen, you can be a poplar seed, he said to himself, and you have an advantage that they don't. You can choose where you want to land. Then he thought some more and continued this speech to himself. So where will you go, Stephen Stroh? He thought about how all the different plants spread their seeds in different ways, all with the goal of giving the seeds the best chance at a good life. Squirrels bury acorns. Some remain uneaten the following spring and sprout. Deer eat apples and deposit the seeds in their droppings miles away. Burrs stick to anything to be transported where? Dandelions sail on the wind like poplar seeds. And it's not just plants, he continued under his breath. Perch eggs stick to the feathers of ducks and are delivered to ponds far away. His imagination went from one mode of dispersion to another, and he drifted off to sleep. In the morning, Stephen made 2 sandwiches of fried spaghetti sauce on bread. In the skillet, he reduced the sauce to a paste so as not to make the bread soggy. He filled his thermos with coffee. His grandfather had given him the thermos. It was stainless steel and very solid. The original cap was gone, but Stephen's grandfather had whittled and sanded a cork stopper as a replacement. The cup was still original. From blossom time all through summer to just before harvest was spraying season. Many of the pesticides used at Rockmount orchards were dangerous. Using the sprayers required training and experience, and so Anton and Brock did that work. Stephen, Greg, and sometimes Bud operated the cutter bars. Jesse was being trained on the sprayers, as that would also be good training for operating a bin master. George Malloway and Holmes mended deer fencing on the edges of some of the blocks. Each crew member had his assignment. Through most of the summer, they only saw each other in the mornings and at the end of the day back at the packing house. One Monday morning, at the end of June, Ted Castro made an announcement to the assembled crew. I'm sure all of you are aware that apples grown in the state of Washington have made inroads into the East Coast market. Consequently, East Coast orchardists like ourselves have been, he paused, searching for the right word, cultivating inroads into the European market, pardon the pun. The crew silently awaited his next words. One variety of apple we grow, Puritan, does not store well and is thus unsuited for export. It has been decided by the powers that be that Rockmount will stop growing Puritans. In their place, we will plant a cultivar from the land of the rising sun, or setting sun from our vantage point, an apple called Fuji. So, beginning today, the outdoor crew will be working as a unit again. You will remove the Puritans. He explained that they would pull the trees out of the ground using Rockmount's two heaviest tractors, the Ford 5000 and the big John Deere. They would each pull a heavy chain, which would be wrapped around the trunks of the trees. This sounded like fun to Stephen. He had not known that tractors were powerful enough to rip trees from the ground. He looked forward to seeing it. After the briefing, the crew headed out for the Herrick, the block where the Puritans were. Anton and Brock drove the tractors. George Malloway drove the rest of the crew in the van. It had rained the night before, and the grass underneath the trees was still wet, but the sun was shining as the van pulled into the loading area of the block. They opened the side door of the van, talked and drank coffee while they waited for Brock and Anton. Stephen would be working the chain. He wondered if it was really possible for a tractor to pull a fully grown apple tree clear out of the ground. The two tractors arrived, and Brock explained what was expected of Stephen and Holmes. You guys' job is to pull the chain up to the tree as the tractor backs up to it. When it gets close enough, you wrap the chain around the trunk of the tree and latch the hook so the tractor can pull it down. Try to hook it as high as you can to get the most leverage. When it's latched, you give a hand signal that you're ready. And when the tree is pulled down, you go and disconnect the chain. Let the tractor drag it away and move on to the next tree. Those guys will butcher the Puritans with chainsaws, Brock said. The morning sunshine was interrupted by fast-moving low clouds that threatened more showers. Then the gloom suddenly yielded to gleaming sunshine again. Wind flowed across the hillside in waves, ruffling the trees, exposing the pale, leathery undersides of the apple leaves. The wet grass, having grown long again, glittered in the sunshine. While they talked, the crew heard goats calling out. Then, strangely, 6 goats of several different colors trotted down through the orchard toward the men. Where they came from, the men didn't know, but for the rest of the day, the goats watched the outdoor crew work. The men put away their thermoses and divided into their assigned duties. The chain was heavy and long, extending about 30 feet from the back of the tractor. Stephen was strong enough to drag the chain up to the tree as the tractor backed up. But he knew that by the end of the day, he would be exhausted. Anton and Stephen started in on the lower right side of the block. Brock and Holmes started at the top left side. The two crews would work toward each other until they met in the middle of the block. Anton drove the tractor forward until he was close to the first tree. Stephen picked up the chain and held it taut as Anton turned the tractor around and backed up toward the tree. It was important not to get the chain under the tractor wheels. When he was close enough, Stephen, wearing heavy leather work gloves, reached his left arm around the trunk of the tree and grasped the hook end of the chain from his right hand. From his right hand, pulled it around the tree and hooked the chain secure. He held it taut until Anton began moving the tractor forward to pull up the slack. Then Stephen let go and scrambled out from under the branches. He waved to Anton to go ahead. Anton pulled down the throttle lever, worked the clutch, and pushed the posi pedal to engage both drive wheels without differential. Black diesel exhaust blasted from the stack as the motor growled. The top of the tree shook as its roots resisted the pull, but the tractor was powerful enough, and after a brief struggle, engine roaring, the root system of the tree emerged, vibrating from the earth, ripping and snapping as the crown toppled over and the tree was dragged out, leaving a crater in the ground. The two teams had dragged down several trees each when Greg Edison arrived with a flatbed truck with 8 apple bins tied to its bed. Greg worked with George, Jesse, and Bud to cut up the felled trees, stacking the wood into the bins. The noise of the tractors, together with the chainsaws, was exciting to Stephen. He immersed himself in the spirit of the work, feeling he was good at it, that he could get in under the branches, hook the chain, and get out, give the signal quickly. He hollered out like a cowboy, "Hyah! Hyah!" only half joking. The two teams brought down the trees faster than Greg, George, Jesse, and Bud could cut them up with the chainsaws. So Anton said that there was no need to hurry. Holmes had it easy, Stephen figured, because Brock would drag each tree all the way down from the loading area to be cut up. Holmes could wait until Brock returned to pull down more trees. Anton and Stephen started out from just next to the loading area. Stephen wanted to be seen as a hard worker. Anton and Stephen took a break to let the chainsaw guys catch up. Anton explained that applewood is some of the best firewood to be had. From this block of Puritans, they were going to get enough firewood to heat 3 or 4 houses through the winter. He asked if Stephen wanted some. "You want some? Easy as pie. We'll just take a truck over to your house if you want. Greg's going to get some. He's got kids and all." Stephen was excited at the thought of his job having the extra benefit of supplying his parents with firewood. He said he'd take some. Anton beamed the way he always did. As they got back to work, it began to rain again. But it was warm, and they knew the rain wouldn't last. They kept working. They were on a steep section of the hillside. Anton backed the tractor up toward a tree from below. The tires slipped on the wet grass and mud, stripping out rocks that tumbled down the slope. As the tractor made slow progress uphill. Tractor tires are designed to grip well going forward, but backing up they often slip. It was normal, and pulling down the tree would be that much easier because the slope would be to the tractor's advantage. Stephen figured. Stephen held the chain as Anton used his best skills to get the tractor close enough that Stephen could wrap the chain around the trunk. The rain fell harder, and the tractor struggled against the steep slope, but they were getting close. Stephen reached 4 feet down the length of the chain with his right hand to pull in enough slack to wrap around the tree. Anton churned the wheels against the muddying earth, and finally there was some slack in the chain. Stephen tossed the hook end around the back of the tree and reached around to grab it with his left hand. He reached his right arm around the tree to hold himself up on the slope, wrapping his legs around the trunk. He realized that he was not a particularly strong boy, and the chain was heavy. Anton's skill in operating the tractor in these difficult conditions impressed Stephen. Anton seemed to know just how to apply the right power at the right time to gain those last few inches Stephen needed to hook the chain. The tractor struggled. Stephen pulled the chain hard to take up every bit of slack to get the hook to catch that closest link in the chain. Then, with one last thrust, The tractor gained against the hill. There was slack. Stephen held his right arm around the tree and slipped the hook home between two links. Then suddenly the chain pulled taut. Stephen felt the squeeze on his right forearm, which by disastrous carelessness now found itself caught in the tiny triangle between the tree trunk and the chain hook. Stephen could not remove his arm. The chain bit tighter. His right arm was firmly locked against the tree. Panic shot through Stephen. His legs were still wrapped around the trunk of the tree, and he hugged as tightly as he could. The tree shook. Adrenaline took over. Stephen's body froze, clutched to the tree, eyes closed, his attention sent elsewhere, to a memory of being sent to the principal's office in 4th grade. Greg, Bud, George, and Jesse heard the tractor whining as Anton struggled to gain control, wheels churning backward uselessly in the mud. The chain hummed with tension as it alone held the tractor from sliding down the hillside. Then, as if in slow motion, the tree began to rip from the earth, roots creaking and snapping. At last, the tree ripped free and tumbled end over end. Stephen clasped to the trunk, his mind far away, trying to explain to Principal Collins that he hadn't meant to be so disruptive in class. Down the slope, the tree tumbled and crashed against the tractor at the bottom of the hill. The chainsaw stopped. The motor stopped. There was no noise. Stephen came to, upside down, still hugging the tree trunk. He looked down and saw Anton looking up to him with a worried look on his face. "You okay?" Anton shouted. "I think so," Stephen said. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Stephen took notice of his position. He was face down, gripping an apple tree trunk, holding tight with his legs. The smashed crown of the tree crumpled against the tractor. He looked upward and saw the torn roots of the tree against the gray sky. The rain had stopped. Then he looked down again and saw the goats looking up at him along with the crew. Then he saw the chain still holding his arm against the tree. Stephen put the story together in his mind. The tractor had slipped in the muddy soil and pulled down the tree, Stephen having just hooked the chain. The tree and Stephen had tumbled to the bottom of the hill. With the chain now slack, Stephen was able to work the hook loose, and the chain slid to the ground as a snake disappearing through branches. Stephen, still face down, holding on by his legs, inspected his right arm. It had the imprint of the chain on it, but it didn't feel like it was broken. But he knew that at the scene of an accident, you can't tell if you've broken anything. He had broken an arm before, and remembered that it took an hour before it began to hurt. His arm seemed to have full strength. He shimmied down the upside-down tree, climbing through the twisted branches to the ground. Coming out of the tree, he stood with the other outdoor crew members. They watched as Brock inspected Stephen for injuries. Brock looked at Stephen's arm. He looked carefully into Stephen's face. He completed his examination and found no injury, none at all. "I can't believe it. You could have been killed. Geez, not even a scratch," Greg said. Okay, here's the picture of Stephen having tumbled down the hill, looking down. And there's the goats there. But everybody was shocked because he was not injured at all. Okay, the tractor had slid all the way down to the stone wall at the bottom of the hill, a distance of about 50 feet, with the tree and Stephen tumbling behind. Brock told Stephen to sit down in the van for a while. They would check on him periodically to make sure he was okay. Stephen went to the van. The rain had stopped and the sun was out again. Stephen took out his lunch and his thermos of coffee. He sat in the open doorway of the van. The rest of the crew went back to work. The tractors and chainsaws started up again. George took over chain duty with Anton. Stephen poured a cup of coffee and looked up to see that he was the center of attention of the 6 goats. They had all gathered in front of the door of the van, watching Stephen. "You guys are really here, right?" he said to the goats. He joked to himself that he would have been worried if they had replied in English. He chuckled to himself on that thought. At lunchtime, everybody else came to the van and saw Stephen chatting with the goats. "He's talking with the goats. He's okay. That's our Stephen," Brock joked.